It was a crisp winter evening when I first arrived in the remote town of Red Rock, Alaska. The roads had been treacherous, the kind of roads where even a slight misstep could send you careening off the edge of a cliff. But the town was supposed to be quiet, peaceful, a place to escape from the noise of city life. I hadn't expected the fear to settle in so quickly. I had heard stories about Red Rock before, mostly second-hand tales passed down through hushed whispers at bars or the occasional news report about missing hikers and inexplicable events. But those stories were easy to dismiss. That's what I thought. I should have trusted my gut. The first sign that something was wrong came the moment I stepped out of my truck and inhaled the cold Alaskan air. It wasn't the biting chill that unsettled me, but the silence. There were no birds, no wind, just silence. The kind of silence that made my skin crawl. It wasn't natural. As I made my way down the snow-covered street to the tiny inn where I'd be staying, I noticed something odd. The windows of the houses I passed were all dark, their shutters tightly closed. Not a single person in sight. There were no lights except the glow from a few street lamps casting long, distorted shadows across the snow. It was as though the town had been abandoned, yet here I was, in the middle of it. I'd planned to stay for a few days, maybe take a look around, but as I checked in at the inn, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The woman behind the counter, an older lady with graying hair and a thin, tight-lipped smile, barely looked at me when I handed her my ID. She didn't say much, except to hand me the key and mutter something under her breath that I couldn't quite hear. "Room 4, she said, her voice almost a whisper. "Don't go out after dark." I laughed it off, chalking it up to local superstition or the kind of advice old-timers give to strangers. But as I made my way to my room, I couldn't help but feel that something was wrong. The room was small, with outdated furniture and an old-fashioned heater that creaked and groaned as it tried to keep the cold at bay. I set my bag down and glanced out the window, hoping for some distraction. But all I could see was the oppressive dark. The snow had begun to fall heavier now, the wind howling against the window in the way only Alaskan winds can. That's when I heard it, a whisper, so faint, so distant, that at first I thought it was just the wind. But then it came again, clearer this time. My name. I froze. Joan. I'd been alone since I arrived, and the inn was empty. Or so I thought. But that whisper, it was as though someone was standing right behind me. I spun around, but there was no one there. Just the dim room, the uninviting bed, and the growing dread curling in my stomach. I tried to shake it off. It was just my nerves, I told myself. But as I sat down on the edge of the bed, the whisper came again, this time much closer. "Joan." I jumped to my feet, my heart racing. I couldn't explain it, but something was in that room with me. And it wasn't just the cold. I went to the window and peered out. The snow had turned into a full-blown blizzard, but in the distance I saw movement figures. Though far too far to make out clearly, I squinted. But the darkness swallowed them whole. My instincts screamed at me to lock the door and never leave, but curiosity got the better of me. I grabbed my coat and stepped out into the hallway. The inn was eerily still, the kind of quiet that felt like it had been forced on the place. I walked down the hall, my boots making soft thudding noises that seemed louder than they should. The air was thick, heavy, as though I were walking through something thicker than air. When I reached the lobby, the woman behind the counter was gone. There was no sign of anyone, not a single soul. The whole place was dead silent. Even the wind outside seemed to have stopped. A chill ran down my spine as I turned to leave. But then, as I reached for the door, I heard it again. A soft, rhythmic tapping on the window, just above the front entrance. I whipped around and rushed to the window, my breath fogging up the glass as I looked outside. And there, through the snow, I saw them again. Those same shadowy figures, standing still, their forms barely discernible through the thickening storm. But this time, something was different. One of them was moving toward me. A cold sweat broke out on my forehead as I watched the figure. Unable to tear my eyes away, my heart pounded in my chest. I knew that I should have closed the blinds, locked the door, and run. But I was frozen. I could barely breathe. The figure was closer now, its outline more distinct. It was tall, impossibly tall, with limbs that seemed too long. It moved with unnatural fluidity, almost as though it were gliding rather than walking. and then it stopped right outside the window. I backed away, my legs shaking beneath me. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what was happening. Was it a person or something else, something not quite human? Before I could make another move, a loud crash sounded from the back of the inn. I jumped, my heart threatening to break free from my chest. Without thinking, I ran toward the noise, my steps echoing through the empty hall. When I reached the back door, it was wide open. Snow was drifting in, and the wind had picked up again, howling through the open frame. And there, in the snow, were fresh footprints leading away from the inn. Footprints too large to be human. I had to follow. I had to know what was going on, so I grabbed my flashlight and ventured into the blizzard, the snow biting at my skin as I trudged after the footprints. They led me further into the woods behind the inn, where the trees were dense and twisted, their branches creaking in the wind. The further I went, the more uneasy I felt. The hairs on the back of my neck were standing on end, my gut telling me I should turn around, but I couldn't stop, not yet. Then I saw it, a clearing. The footprints stopped in the middle of it. But there was something more, a figure crouched low to the ground. Its back turned to me. I could see its form clearly now, its limbs too long and thin, its head tilted at an unnatural angle. And then it turned to face me. Its eyes were hollow, empty. I froze in place, my breath caught in my throat, unable to move as it slowly stood. It wasn't a person, it wasn't anything human, and then it spoke. John. The voice was not the whisper from the inn. This was loud, guttural, like it was coming from deep within the earth. It wasn't just a voice, it was an echo, a curse. John, you should have never come here. Before I could react, it lunged at me. I don't remember what happened next. The next thing I knew, I woke up back in my room at the inn. The storm had passed and the sun was rising, but the footprints were still there, in the snow, and the whispers. They've never stopped. I had heard the stories before, we all have. The whispers about people vanishing in Alaska's wild places, swallowed whole by the vast, unforgiving landscape. But I never thought much of it. After all, it is easy to dismiss stories of disappearances as just that, stories. Fables spun to make the wilderness seem more dangerous than it already is. But I learned the hard way that some stories aren't made up. I was there to hike, that was the plan anyway. A solo trip to get away from the noise of the world and lose myself in the beauty of Alaska. Maybe it was stupid to go alone, but the idea of having the wilderness all to myself was too enticing to ignore. I had seen the pamphlets about the popular tourist spots, the safe trails and well-trodden paths, but I didn't want that. I wanted something more raw, something real, so I picked a route that wasn't marked on the map, an old trail known only to a few locals. The first signs of trouble came on the second day. The sky had been overcast for hours, the kind of gray that makes everything feel distant and detached. I was following the trail, if you could even call it that. It had long since faded into a few crumbling markers and a rough path through the underbrush, but I was used to hiking, and I knew how to stay oriented. The trees were thick here, old pines that creaked and groaned in the wind, their boughs brushing together like 1,000 whispers. It was the kind of quiet that feels heavy, like the land is waiting for something. Around noon, I started to notice something odd. It was the silence. Not the good kind of silence that settles in the wilderness, but something more oppressive. The usual hum of insects, the rustle of leaves in the wind, even the chirping of birds, it all seemed to disappear. And in its place, there was nothing. Absolute stillness. I pushed on, telling myself it was nothing, probably just the weather changing or my mind playing tricks. But the deeper I went into the woods, the more the feeling of unease settled in my gut. I couldn't shake the sensation that I was being watched. At first it was a small thing, like someone following too close behind on a trail. The feeling that if I turned around fast enough, I'd catch someone just out of sight. But I kept moving, telling myself it was nothing more than nerves. Then I found the first clue. It was a pair of boots, old tattered boots, discarded near a thicket. There were no footprints leading up to them. Nothing that explained why someone would just leave their shoes behind in the middle of nowhere. The boots were covered in mud, but that was the only sign of anything having been there. No signs of a struggle, no trail leading off into the trees. Just the boots, abandoned like a warning. I hesitated, a sense of dread creeping up my spine, but curiosity won out, and I bent down to inspect them closer. That's when I saw the mark, a faint carving on the sole of one of the boots, a symbol strange and jagged, almost like something ancient. Something not meant to be seen by modern eyes. I tried to brush it off, but the chill that ran down my spine told me otherwise. I stood up and looked around, the woods feeling more claustrophobic now. The feeling that something was wrong settled deeper. I didn't know it then, but I was about to walk straight into the heart of it. The next few hours were a blur of panic and confusion. I couldn't find the trail anymore, and it felt like the trees were closing in around me. The fog began to roll in, thick and wet, clinging to the ground, like a living thing. I'd checked my compass, but the needle spun wildly. I had no idea which direction I was going in anymore. The world around me was swallowed by the fog, and soon, even the familiar shapes of the trees seemed to shift, morphing into grotesque, twisted forms. That's when I heard the voice. It was faint at first, a whisper in the wind. But it wasn't the wind. It was too clear, too deliberate. Get out. I froze. I told myself it was nothing, just my mind playing tricks on me again. But then the voice came again, louder this time, and more urgent. Get out now. I turned, scanning the fog for any sign of movement. There was nothing, no one, just the whispering trees and the endless expanse of white mist. But the feeling, the overwhelming sense of being watched, was too strong to ignore. I started walking faster, the crunch of my boots on the frozen earth the only sound breaking the silence. My heart was racing now, my breath coming in shallow gasps. The air felt thick, suffocating. I had to get out. That's when I saw it. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, but the more I stared, the more real it became. A figure, standing just beyond the fog. A silhouette, tall and wide, with the outline of something almost like antlers. I couldn't make out its face. It was too obscured by the mist, but I felt its eyes on me. They were cold, unblinking. I wanted to run. My body screamed at me to flee, but my legs wouldn't move. I was frozen, trapped in that moment, unable to do anything but watch as the figure stepped forward. Then it spoke. Not in words, but in a growl, a deep, guttural sound that rattled my bones. And as it moved closer, I could see the shape of its mouth, wide and jagged, full of teeth that didn't belong on any creature I knew. Go back, or you will be like them. The words hit me like a punch. My mind raced, trying to piece together what I was seeing. And then it hit me. The missing hikers, the legends, the people who had vanished over the years, never to be seen again. Some had said it was bears. Some said it was the weather. But there were whispers, too, of something else in the woods, something older, something that preyed on those who wandered too far from the known paths. I ran. I didn't look back. I didn't care about the fog or the trees or the sound of footsteps behind me. My only thought was to get out. Hours later, I stumbled into a ranger station, my body trembling and soaked with sweat. The rangers took one look at me and didn't ask questions, they just took me in. But before I left, one of them pulled me aside. I don't know what you saw, he said, voice low, but you're lucky you made it out. Not many do. He didn't elaborate, but the look in his eyes told me everything I needed to know. The woods had claimed more people than he was willing to talk about, and whatever I had seen out there, it wasn't the first time someone had come running back with a story like mine. As I left Alaska, I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't over, that whatever I had encountered was still out there, waiting, and that I might not be the last one to hear its call. But the worst part, I could still hear the whispers, the voice in the wind, the same one that had told me to leave, and I knew, somewhere deep down, that it wasn't finished with me yet. It's the kind of cold that sinks deep into your bones. A biting, relentless cold that makes the hairs on the back of your neck stand up straight. That's how it was when I first stepped foot into the heart of Alaska. The kind of cold that's not just physical, but something that creeps inside you, settling in your chest like a quiet, waiting dread. I had heard the stories before. People told me tales of the Alaskan wilderness, where shadows were longer, nights were darker, and the land seemed to have a mind of its own. But I never thought much about it. I should have. I had been in Alaska for 3 weeks, just me and the endless expanse of snow-covered trees. The kind of place where you can drive for miles and see nothing but the same stretch of road, winding through dense forests that make you feel like you're the last person alive on Earth. I had rented a small cabin off the beaten path, far enough from civilization to enjoy some peace and quiet. The locals had warned me about the weather, the isolation, and the way people sometimes went missing out here, but I didn't pay it much attention. People talk. The first night, I noticed something odd. I was sitting in the cabin, fire crackling in the fireplace, sipping on a mug of tea. There was a light snowfall outside, just enough to make everything look fresh and pristine. But as I looked out the window, I could have sworn I saw something moving in the woods. It wasn't an animal, not a bear or a moose. No, it was too deliberate. A shadow gliding through the trees with a kind of unnatural grace. I chalked it up to the isolation. My mind was playing tricks on me. Probably just a trick of the light or the way the snow was falling. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone out there. I brushed it off, went to bed, and tried to ignore the sense of unease that clung to me like the cold. The next day, it happened again. This time, I was out for a walk trying to get some fresh air. The forest was silent, not even the rustle of leaves or the chirp of birds. Just the sound of my boots crunching in the snow, and then I heard footsteps, faint but unmistakable, crunching in the snow behind me. I stopped, turned around, but there was nothing. Just the empty stretch of snow stretching out into the woods. I'd been walking for miles, and I was sure I hadn't seen anyone yet. The footsteps were still there, fading away in the distance, as if someone or something had been walking just behind me. That night, as the wind howled outside, I sat in front of the fireplace, my thoughts swirling with confusion. I didn't know what to think. Was I being paranoid? Was my mind just playing tricks on me? But the fear I felt was real. Too real, the worst part. It didn't stop. Over the next few days, the strange occurrences continued. Footsteps, voices in the distance that I couldn't quite make out. I started locking the doors at night, even though there was no one out there. But deep down, I knew that wasn't what I was afraid of. It was something else, something in the woods. The locals had warned me about the northern spirits. Stories passed down for generations. They spoke of creatures, ghosts, spirits, or something worse, that roamed the wilderness, especially in the coldest months of the year. They said these things fed on isolation, on fear. I didn't believe in such nonsense. Not until I had spent more time out there. On the fifth night, I finally heard it clearly, the unmistakable sound of a child's laughter, echoing from the woods. It was high-pitched, gleeful, almost too innocent to be real. But it was real. I ran to the window, heart pounding, but when I looked outside, there was nothing, just the dense snow, the trees bending under the weight of it. I don't know why I did it, but I grabbed my coat and walked outside. The snow was deeper now, the air colder, biting at my face. I shouldn't have gone into the woods. But something pushed me. Some sick, twisted curiosity. The laughter grew louder, like it was mocking me. I followed the sound, walking deeper into the forest. The trees closing in around me like something alive. The path was familiar, but the further I went, the more wrong it felt. The snow was untouched. No footprints, not even the hint of an animal. The laughter continued, just out of reach, just around the next corner of trees. I should have turned back, but I didn't. Then I saw it. At first it was just a shape, standing in the distance, obscured by the mist rising from the ground. But as I got closer, it became clearer, a figure crouched low, hiding just beyond the trees. I froze. My heart skipped a beat. It was a person, or at least it looked like one. But the way it stood, the way it moved, didn't feel human. I called out, but the figure didn't respond. It just stared, unmoving, its dark eyes fixed on me. I took a step forward, and that's when I heard the voice again. This time it was clearer. "Come closer," it said. The voice was childlike, sweet, almost playful, but the tone was wrong. Something wasn't right. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to run, to get away. But I couldn't. Then, just as I took another step, the figure vanished, fading into the mist like smoke. I stumbled backward, panic flooding my chest. My mind was racing. Was it real? Was I losing my mind? I ran back to the cabin, my breath coming in ragged gasps, the snow crunching beneath my boots. When I got inside, I bolted the door and locked every window. I tried to calm myself down. But the image of that figure, the way it had stood, unmoving and cold, kept flashing through my mind. That wasn't a human being. That was something else. I spent the next few days inside, barely venturing out. But the strangest thing happened. The footsteps stopped. The laughter faded. The sense of being watched. It never went away, but it was quieter now, as if whatever it was had gotten bored of me. Then the phone rang. It was a local police officer. He said there had been some recent disappearances in the area, people who had wandered into the woods and never returned. He mentioned something about a dark legend that had resurfaced in the past few weeks. Something about a spirit, something from the past that had come to claim the living. As he spoke, my stomach twisted. The things I had experienced weren't just my imagination, they were real. The officer's voice cracked. "Whatever you do, don't go back out there, stay inside, we'll be watching." But I knew it was too late. The thing in the woods was still watching me, waiting. And I wasn't sure how long I could outrun it. I never believed in the stories. The ones you hear from old-timers in the bars. The ones about the shadowy figures in the dark. The whispers on the wind. Or the things that lurk just beyond the tree line in Alaska. But that was before I found myself stranded in a small cabin, miles from the nearest town, with nothing but the wind and snow for company. I was driving through Alaska on a solo road trip, determined to experience the raw beauty of the wilderness. I'd heard stories from a few locals about strange occurrences, but I brushed them off. Being a skeptic, I thought of it as nothing more than overactive imaginations, embellished by years of isolation and harsh winters. But something in the air that day, something shifted. I'd taken a wrong turn. The snowstorm had come out of nowhere, the kind that makes you lose all sense of direction. I ended up in the middle of nowhere, on a barely marked road that seemed to vanish into the woods. I tried to turn around, but my truck was stuck in the snow. The road had become an unrelenting sheet of white. My GPS was useless, just a spinning wheel of nothingness. I decided to take refuge in a small cabin I spotted in the distance. The place looked abandoned, and for a moment, I hesitated. But what choice did I have? I was too far from the nearest town, and there was no sign of any help. With the snow falling harder by the minute, I figured I'd be okay inside for the night. The cabin was old, maybe 100 years old, if I had to guess. Its walls were weathered, with wooden beams creaking under the weight of time. The smell of dust and pine filled the air, and the only light came from a single flickering bulb overhead. There was a small wood stove in the corner, with a pile of logs beside it. I didn't mind, I wasn't picky, I needed warmth and shelter. I spent the first hour trying to make myself comfortable, lighting a fire and unwrapping my gear. The wind howled outside, and the storm seemed to grow in intensity, as if the world itself was being consumed by the cold. My stomach growled, but I had no intention of cooking. I figured I'd sleep through the night and head out early the next day. That was when I first heard it. At first, it was faint, a scraping noise, like something dragging across the snow outside. I told myself it was just the wind. Alaska was notorious for creating sounds that played tricks on the mind, twisting the ordinary into the unsettling. But then, it came again, louder this time, closer. I stood up, heart pounding in my chest, and moved toward the window. I pulled back the curtain, but the night outside was as black as the void. There was no sign of anything, no animal tracks in the snow, nothing to explain the sound. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I laughed nervously at myself, trying to dismiss it. It's just a trick of the mind, I told myself. It's the isolation, the cold. You're just imagining things. But as I turned back toward the fire, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The floorboards, creaky as they were, had not been disturbed. I'd been the only one to move in here. The sound had come from outside, but now there were footprints, faint, half-frozen prints in the snow, leading up to the cabin's door. I froze. The tracks were fresh too, fresh to be from the night before. They were large, heavy, but they didn't belong to any animal I knew. The snow was too deep for a person to have made them without leaving more of an impression. Whoever or whatever had made these tracks was moving with unnatural ease. I was no expert on Alaskan folklore, but I'd heard enough to know that this was a sign. The locals often spoke of the bristlefoot, a creature that haunted the forests of Alaska. It was said to be a half-man, half-beast, a cursed figure that could shape-shift and stalk the wilderness, drawing travelers into its deadly game. It's just a story. It's just a story, I repeated over and over in my mind. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized I had no logical explanation for what I was seeing. I needed to get out. My truck was stuck, and I had no other option but to stay inside and wait out the storm. I grabbed my gear and tried to make myself as comfortable as I could, but sleep never came. I kept hearing the sound of scraping, like nails on glass just beyond the walls of the cabin. It would stop for a while, and then start again. I kept telling myself it was just the wind, the trees swaying in the storm, but deep down, I knew something was wrong. The fire had dwindled to embers when I heard it again. A loud bang at the door. I jumped up, heart racing, my breath shallow as I stared at the darkened door. The sound came again, stronger this time. I moved toward it, slowly, quietly, my eyes darting around the room as if I could somehow see what was outside through the solid wood. I don't know what I expected to see when I opened the door, perhaps a bear or a fellow traveler who had gotten lost in the storm. But when I swung it open, the darkness outside seemed to swallow me whole. There was nothing there. Nothing except more snow and the crushing silence of the wilderness. Then, as I stepped back inside, the wind howled louder than before, and I saw something that made my heart stop. A shadow. It wasn't like a shadow cast by a tree or the flickering light. No, this one moved, flowing in and out of the trees, stretching across the snow like it had a life of its own. I couldn't see details, just the outline, a figure standing in the trees. It was huge, taller than any man could be, and its form seemed to shift, as if it was made of smoke or darkness itself. I slammed the door shut, my hands shaking, my mind racing. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't explain it, but I knew that thing wasn't just a shadow. It was real, and it was out there. Then the whispers started, low guttural sounds, carried by the wind, brushing past the cabin like a breath on the back of my neck. The voice was indistinct, but I could feel the malice in it, like it was trying to lure me out. I clamped my hands over my ears, trying to block it out. But the whispers only grew louder. "Come outside," they hissed. "Come find me." I tried to sleep, but every time I closed my eyes, the image of that shadow haunted me. It was standing just beyond the cabin, watching, waiting. I couldn't escape it. In the morning, the storm had finally stopped. The silence outside was suffocating, and the snow had piled so high around the cabin that the door was almost buried. But when I forced it open and stepped outside, the footprints were gone. All that remained was a thick layer of fresh snow, undisturbed. I didn't stick around long enough to figure out what had happened. I left the cabin and walked back to my truck, but the sense of dread didn't leave me. It followed me all the way back to town, lingering like a shadow in my peripheral vision. The locals laughed when I asked about the creature, the bristlefoot, as if it was just another fairy tale, but something tells me that what I saw that night was far from fiction. To this day, I can't shake the feeling that it's still out there, watching, waiting. I haven't returned to Alaska since, and I don't think I ever will. Some places, some things should be left alone. There's a darkness in the wild, one that's older than time itself, and it's not something you can outrun. The storm came out of nowhere. One minute it was quiet, dead quiet, the kind of silence you only get in the wilderness, the kind that makes you feel like the world has just stopped. Then, like the flip of a switch, the wind picked up. At first it was a soft whistle, barely perceptible through the dense trees. But within minutes, the wind howled through the jagged peaks of the Alaska range, twisting and turning like something alive. I hadn't meant to get stuck here. I was just supposed to be on a routine field assignment for the company surveying some land out near the Nick River. But this place, this forest, there's something off about it. I don't know how to explain it. It wasn't the usual feeling of being alone, cut off from the world. No, it was something deeper, like the trees themselves were watching me. At first, I chalked it up to the isolation. I had only been out here for a few days, and the thought of being so far removed from civilization was beginning to mess with my mind. The days were long, and the nights were darker than I'd ever known, even in the depths of winter. But it was the silence that got to me. It wasn't natural. There was no wind, no animal sounds, not even the occasional snap of a twig beneath a deer's hooves. Just nothing. That night, the storm came, and it wasn't the first one I'd seen in Alaska. The wind had blown through the valley before, but this It felt different. The temperature dropped so quickly, my breath came out in visible puffs, though I was still bundled up tightly in my gear. The snow was coming down in thick, heavy sheets, making everything seem unreal, like I had stepped into some sort of strange world that didn't belong to this one. I set up camp near a small clearing. The storm had been so sudden, I didn't even have time to think about heading back to the truck. I tried calling out, but the phone was dead. Just the same static noise I'd gotten earlier that day. I cursed under my breath, checked the satellite radio, nothing. Just the howl of the wind. And that's when I saw it. A figure at first. I thought I was imagining it. My mind playing tricks in the middle of nowhere so far from help. But no, the silhouette stood too still, too motionless against the backdrop of the trees. My heart pounded in my chest as I squinted into the storm, unsure of what I was seeing. The figure didn't move, didn't even flinch when the wind howled louder, the snow blinding me. I called out, but my voice was swallowed by the storm. The figure didn't answer. I couldn't tell if it was a person. It was too far away, too blurred by the snow, but I could feel it watching me. There was something wrong, something unnatural about it. It was like it was waiting for something, waiting for me. That night, sleep was impossible. Every creak of the tent, every gust of wind made my skin crawl. It was as if the forest was trying to drag me under, pulling me into something I couldn't understand. The next morning, I forced myself to move. The storm had calmed, but the snow was thick, heavy, and unyielding. It had covered everything, the tracks I had made, the campfire I'd abandoned, even the figure I had seen the night before. Gone. There was no sign of it. No footprints, just the stillness of the wilderness. But there was something else, something that didn't belong in the snow. Near the edge of the clearing was a trail of something dark, blood maybe. I couldn't tell for sure, but it was smeared in a jagged line that seemed to crawl across the snow, curving around the trees as though whatever had made it was moving, but not in any way that made sense, not like an animal. The blood, or whatever it was, had stopped abruptly against the base of a tree. I froze, staring at it. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. Something was very, very wrong here. And then I heard it, the faintest sound, like a whisper on the wind. My pulse quickened. I turned to look behind me, but there was nothing but the trees and the endless white. I don't know why I followed the trail. Maybe it was because I was desperate for answers, or maybe it was just curiosity. But as I made my way deeper into the forest, I realized something terrifying. I was being led. The trail didn't stop. It pulled me forward. The deeper I went, the more oppressive the feeling became. The trees were closing in around me, the air colder, heavier, like the forest itself was suffocating me. I don't remember how long I walked. My mind was fuzzy, my thoughts disjointed. I was starting to feel the weight of the isolation pressing down on me. The world felt off balance, as if gravity itself had shifted, and the trees were leaning in, listening, waiting, watching. That's when I saw it, a shack. I almost didn't believe my eyes. It was a small, dilapidated thing, barely standing, half buried in snow. The wood was warped and cracked, the roof sagging as though it hadn't seen a soul in years. I approached slowly, every nerve on edge. The air was thick with a kind of malevolent stillness, and I could feel the pulse of the place. Something wrong in the air, something that wasn't right. I reached the door and tried to open it, but it was locked. I tried again, but the door creaked open of its own accord, as if inviting me inside. I stepped in. The stench hit me first, stale, rotten, like something had died inside a long time ago. My eyes adjusted to the dim light, and I could make out a few old furniture pieces covered in dust and debris. But it was the walls. The walls were covered in markings, scratches, symbols, some of them so deep in the wood, I couldn't tell if they were carved or simply worn into the grain over time. There was a table in the middle of the room, an old wooden thing, and on it, a box. I didn't want to open it, but something inside me, something I couldn't control, compelled me to. When I opened the box, my stomach dropped. Inside, there was a collection of things, trinkets, strange artifacts, a lock of hair, and a bundle of photographs. Old ones, yellowed. The people in the photos were all familiar. Faces I had seen before. Faces of people who had disappeared in the forest over the years. All of them had vanished without a trace. Just like the rumors said, they were never found. And suddenly, it clicked. The figure I'd seen in the storm, the trail of blood, the shack, the people who had vanished, they hadn't left. They were still here, trapped in the forest, somewhere between this world and the next. And they were waiting for someone like me. The door slammed shut behind me, and the darkness descended like a blanket. The last thing I remember is hearing footsteps in the snow outside. Soft, slow, deliberate. And then nothing. Vanishing without a trace is more than just a story. It's a reminder of the wild, untamed places where the lines between the living and the dead blur. And the forest never forgets those who disappear. It's funny how quickly you can go from feeling completely in control to absolutely helpless, like you were being swallowed whole by the dark. It's even stranger when it happens in a place you thought you knew. I always prided myself on being practical, sane, level-headed, but Alaska has a way of making you doubt that. I should have known better. The trip was supposed to be a quiet getaway, a chance to get away from everything work responsibilities, the endless noise of city life. I rented a small cabin in the middle of nowhere, nestled deep in the Alaskan wilderness, far from the nearest town. The snow had already begun to fall heavily when I arrived, and the air was so cold it felt like you could crack your skin just by breathing it in. But it was peaceful. That's what I told myself. The first night was uneventful. The wind howled outside, but I had a fire crackling and a bottle of whiskey to keep me company. There's a certain beauty to the way the snow muffles everything. No sounds, just the soft, gentle falling of the flakes. But by the second night, something felt wrong. It started with a noise, small, almost unnoticeable, but it was there. A sound like something scraping against wood. At first I told myself it was just the wind, maybe a branch scraping the side of the cabin. But then it came again, louder this time, scrape, scrape, scrape. It felt like it was right outside the window. But when I looked, there was nothing, just the endless white wilderness stretching out before me. I wasn't sure what to make of it, so I tried to push the thought out of my mind. But that night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. There was something out there watching. I told myself it was just paranoia. Maybe I was hearing things. But when I heard the scrape again, closer this time, I knew it wasn't just my imagination. I grabbed a flashlight, shivering as I stepped outside. The snow was thick, and the air was so cold it burned my lungs. I scanned the area, heart pounding. The flashlight beam caught only trees, blanketed in snow. There was nothing there, just the sound of the wind. But as I turned to go back inside, I noticed something odd in the snow near the edge of the cabin. Footprints, fresh ones, large, heavy impressions in the snow, leading toward the woods. The tracks were spaced too far apart for any normal animal I knew. They weren't human either, too wide. I stood frozen, staring at the prints, my mind racing. What the hell? The only person in miles was me. And yet, someone or something had been there. I went back inside, locked the door, and huddled by the fire, trying to rationalize it. Maybe it was a prank. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. This was something else. The next day, I didn't venture out. I stayed inside, too paranoid to go anywhere. The unease gnawed at me, a low, gnawing anxiety. The scraping noises had stopped, but that didn't make me feel any better. If anything, it made me feel worse. It was like whatever had been out there was just waiting, watching, waiting for the right moment. That evening, I heard it again. Only this time it wasn't the scraping sound. This time it was a voice, faint at first, like someone whispering just outside my door. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone. There was something off about it, almost like the voice didn't belong to a human. It was too distorted, too broken, like it had been torn apart by something unnatural. I hesitated, trying to convince myself it was just the wind again, or maybe a trick of the cold. But then I heard it clearer, sharper, help me. I froze, my heart hammering in my chest. The voice was pleading, weak, desperate. The hair on the back of my neck stood on end. I knew I had to check. I couldn't just ignore it. I grabbed the flashlight and cautiously opened the door. The snow was coming down harder now, a thick blanket of white that made it almost impossible to see. I stepped out into the freezing air, the wind biting at my skin, and then I saw it, a figure standing at the edge of the trees, a tall man hunched over, his face obscured by a hood. His clothes were torn, stained with something dark, blood. Please, the voice begged again. Help me. I don't know why I didn't run. Maybe it was the sheer shock of the sight before me. Maybe it was the part of me that still believed in good, in helping others. I took a step forward. The man shifted, and in the dim light I saw the truth. His face was a nightmare. Half of it was missing, the flesh torn away, leaving exposed bone and sinew. His eyes, wide with fear, were unblinking. He reached out toward me, but before he could get any closer, he collapsed to the ground, a sickening thud echoing in the silence. I stumbled back, my body frozen in terror. I wanted to scream, to run, but my feet wouldn't move. And then something else moved in the snow. At first, I thought it was just more shadows. But no, it was something crawling, dragging itself along the snow. A dark shape, large and twisted, moving toward me at a speed too fast for my mind to comprehend. I turned to flee, but as I did, I felt something cold wrap around my leg. I screamed, jerking my foot back, but it was too late. A hand, no, a claw pulled me down into the snow, the grip ice-cold and unyielding. I fought, kicking, clawing at the snow, but whatever it was had me in its grasp. I could feel it pulling me, dragging me further into the dark woods. And then I saw it, a grotesque figure, hunched and skeletal, its face hidden in shadow. Its body was covered in ragged clothes, its limbs impossibly long and twisted. Its eyes, dark pits of despair, stared at me. And I realized too late that the man I had seen earlier, the one I thought needed help, was nothing more than a decoy. A lure. The thing that had been dragging me wasn't a man. It wasn't human. It was something far older, a creature that had been lurking in the Alaskan wilderness for centuries, preying on anyone foolish enough to wander too close. I tried to scream, but the snow filled my mouth, suffocating me, drowning me in its icy grip. I didn't escape. But you're still here. You can still hear my warning. Stay away from the Alaskan wilderness. There are things out there, things you can't even begin to understand. And they're waiting for the next person to come along. The next fool who thinks they're alone in the snow. I thought I could handle it. I thought I knew better, but you won't. You never will. I never believed in ghosts, at least. That's what I kept telling myself as I drove deeper into the desolate wilds of Alaska. The sun had already set hours ago, and the endless stretch of icy road seemed to mock my presence, cutting through the night like a forgotten scar. I had been hired to investigate some old buildings in a deserted village north of Anchorage, nothing more than a footnote in Alaskan history, a place the locals rarely talked about. They called it Shankwut, or at least, that's what I thought they called it. Shankwut had been abandoned decades ago, but rumors had always swirled around the place. They said the village had been a thriving community until something went wrong, something that made it all fall apart in a single night. Some said it was a massacre, others whispered about curses. But no one seemed to know for sure. The whole village was long since lost to time, with nothing but crumbling buildings and forgotten memories scattered across the snow-covered hills. I didn't care about the stories. I was a journalist, and this was just another piece to write about, a relic of the past to explore. But the deeper I drove into the night, the less certain I felt about that mindset. The air grew colder with each passing mile, and a strange tension seemed to build, making my fingers tighten on the wheel. The engine of my truck hummed steadily, but there was an eerie silence outside. No birds, no animals, not even the soft rustle of the wind. I could hear the snow crunch under my tires, the sound amplified in the vast emptiness. A shiver ran down my spine as the first sign of the village appeared. A line of weathered wood and stone structures poking out from the tree line. They looked wrong, as though they had been forgotten by time and weathered by 1,000 winters. I pulled off the road and parked, the headlights illuminating a crumbling church in front of me. The buildings looked like they'd been abandoned long before I was born, their windows shattered and their walls sagging with rot. I grabbed my camera and stepped out into the biting cold, the crunch of snow beneath my boots breaking the silence. The wind picked up as I made my way toward the church, and I noticed the unsettling quiet of the place. The air felt thick, as if the land itself were holding its breath. The moment I stepped inside the church, it felt wrong. The faint smell of mildew mixed with the stench of decay. There was something in the air, a heaviness that I couldn't quite shake. I clicked on my flashlight, shining it across the dusty pews and cracked altar. But something wasn't right. The beam flickered as I moved, casting long, trembling shadows along the walls. There, just for a second, I thought I saw something move, something darker than the rest of the shadows. A figure too tall and too thin, standing motionless in the corner. My heart skipped. I froze, staring at the corner, but nothing was there. Just empty space, old wood, and peeling paint. I laughed nervously to myself. "It's just the wind, just my imagination," I muttered, trying to reassure myself. I turned my back to the corner and began snapping pictures of the altar when I heard something, a faint scraping sound, like metal dragging across wood. I froze again, my breath catching in my throat. The sound stopped, and a chill crawled across my neck. "Who is there?" I called out, my voice sounding too loud, too desperate in the silence. No answer. I laughed again, nervously this time. "You're being stupid. Just get the damn pictures and leave." I snapped a few more photos, but the unease in my chest didn't subside. If anything, it grew. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. I turned toward the door to leave, but that's when I saw it, the faintest outline of a figure standing in the doorway. It wasn't human. It couldn't have been. Its shape was wrong, too tall, too thin, and its face. It had no face, just a blank, smooth surface, like a mask. My pulse raced. I stumbled backward, my feet slipping on the ice. My flashlight fell to the floor, scattering light across the old floorboards. The figure didn't move. It just stood there, staring at me, or rather, where its face should have been. I turned and ran, my heart hammering in my chest. I dashed out of the church and back to my truck, the harsh wind cutting through my jacket. The air felt suffocating, as if the land itself were trying to swallow me whole. My hands shook as I fumbled for my keys. Finally starting the engine, I glanced back at the church, but the figure was gone, as if it had never been there at all. I drove away from the village, my heart pounding in my ears, my mind racing with thoughts I couldn't make sense of. It was just a trick of the light, I told myself. But deep down, I knew I had seen something I couldn't explain. It wasn't until later, when I was back at my cabin, reviewing the pictures I had taken, that I began to doubt my own sanity. In one of the photos, there was something faint, something almost invisible, but unmistakably there. A shape, hovering in the background, barely discernible. It looked like a person, but I couldn't make out any details. It had the same tall, thin outline, and just like before, there was no face. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a trick of the light. Maybe it was just an old building playing tricks on my mind. But I couldn't shake the image, couldn't get rid of the feeling that I wasn't alone, even as I sat in the warmth of my cabin. I went to bed hoping I could shake the dread that clung to me, but that night I woke up to the sound of scraping again. This time it wasn't a distant sound, it was right outside my door. The unmistakable sound of someone dragging itself across the snow. I froze in place, my breath coming in sharp gasps. The door rattled, and I heard a voice, low and guttural, whispering in a language I couldn't understand. I bolted upright, my heart in my throat. It had come from the village. I knew, without a doubt, that I had stumbled into something far darker than I had ever imagined. The village of Shankwit had never been abandoned. Not truly. Something had been left behind, something that couldn't be buried. Something that waited, patient and hungry. I tried to leave the next morning. I didn't care about the photos anymore. I just wanted to get out. But as I packed my things, I found a strange object on the floor of my cabin. A small wooden doll, crudely carved, with no face. It was the same thing I had seen in the corner of the church. I didn't stay to investigate further. I left Alaska as quickly as I could, but the image of that faceless figure still haunts me. And sometimes when the wind howls outside my window at night, I swear I hear that scraping sound again. It's as if the ghosts of Shankwit have followed me, and I know deep down that they'll never stop watching.